meeting where we're going to make final decisions before we post. So we'll walk through all of these, want your input on them, and we'll turn it over to Kenneth.
Okay, so we're going to start with that supported employment definition.
Okay, we can't have
So we start with supported employment, not supported employment.
What did that folder say? Supported employment.
So the ones you handed out the same as the ones that were sent out?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we can follow along up here.
What you looking for?
What she's looking for. Is that right? Okay, so I have that. So we left everything basically the same. If you scroll down, we added in that transportation component. So what we heard from the suggestions from last meeting is that bring something over to the long-term follow-along that mirrors what community networking does.
You're good, you're good.
So what we have is transportation when the individual job does not include staffing support. Payments for transportation are established as a per-trip charge for mileage. If we go down further, this is different than what I sent out. We talked about the requirements for staffing. Before it had that 3 years. We needed 3 years of experience. Based on internal discussions, it was recommended to have 0 years experience, so the same as all of our other rehabilitative services. So this part would be struck through the definition.
Yes, that's why it's not on
Right, that's why it's not on.
our.
Any questions thus far? Do we want to go through the definition more thoroughly?
I'm just looking on the, just make sure on that one with the, it said long-term follow-up supports include, and then you said transportation when the individual's job does not include staffing support.
Right.
So it does include, this can, so you're saying this can be just transportation piece of it?
Right.
Okay.
Similar to how community networking
Okay.
So when it does include staffing support, it includes transportation.
is. Right.
Transportation is on the job site. By agencies.
Say that again? Always includes transportation. So that seems permissive, meaning it does allow transportation to be provided both when there's staffing support and when, when there's not staffing.
Yeah, 75 charge is on
So they could contract just transportation with somebody with this, the way it's set up. So they wouldn't have to go through the same supported employment provider if they were, and I guess that'll be something that people who do transportation will have to understand, because would they then say I'm only needing transportation to my job, do I then have to be an authorized provider of supported employment to be able to bill for the transportation piece?
No, it's very similar to the the community networking definition has a transportation component just for transportation if the individual doesn't need staffing. So it will be done the same way. It would be done through the MCO.
Okay, so they wouldn't have, I'm just wondering if they might say, oh, well, that's not under our normal guides, you know.
So the next phase, the next phase after this, once we get this posted, we'll have to be training the
Staff on.
But that's just part of the long-term follow-up support, right? Because
Yes.
on page 2, you've got the initial support. It has the statement, this service includes transportation from the individual's residence to and from the job site, provider's agency payment for transportation from the individual's residence to the individual's job site is authorized service time. So basically, we're just incorporating that same concept into long-term support, correct?
Well, breaking it separate so that you, if someone just needs transportation to and from their job,
They
they don't have to go through their supported employment provider to do that. They can get that piece of it.
And the reason that we did this is because you guys talked about the problem of people who just need transportation to their job. That you like the community networking component and how that allowed people to get places where they need to go if they don't need staff and support. So we tried to build that. around
That's
that.
right.
Do I understand on this that the person does not have to be receiving long-term follow-along from the MCO to qualify for the transportation?
Correct, it's a separate modifier at the time.
Okay.
How would you set the rates on these?
On which transportation,
Transportation.
for the mileage, probably use the state rate.
And if it requires handicap lifts, wheelchair lifts?
We don't have a rate for that. Actually, what we have is a cap on it, a couple thousand
No,
dollars.
no, emergency medical transportation though, that's a rate. I believe there's a rate.
Yeah, I remember that.
Is it state or federal?
Non-emergency medical is this state
This is
state
probably,
service.
this is probably going to get a lot of feedback when it goes out. I noticed that with the Wake LME, they required us to use, when I was a rider agency, and we got federal money from DOT for transportation. They required us to use established transportation, like Wake transportation. So instead of reimbursing someone at a state rate, you're having to pay a much larger amount. So where $20,000 would have done well to reimburse just individuals providing that transportation back and forth, you're paying more on the term of $20 to $40 one way for the trip by using established transportation, like Wake transportation, the public buses or the tier 1 supports.
Yeah, we're going to want to indicate that it's the most cost effective.
Least cost to the provider. If you're using regular public transit, there are federal requirements on what you can charge, particularly curb-to-curb service.
But if you are doing things after hours, where it's not in the normal range, then
They can charge
they charge you extras here.
And some of y'all may, I just remember, transportation's always been a complex issue. And I can remember when non-medical transportation, being on a particular DMA call, and you might have the usual characters like us on a particular call, but on this particular call that was DMA, there were 50 transportation providers on this call, and they all cared about it a whole lot. And somehow is there a special registration where you have to be kind of like a DME vendor to DMA? You have to be a DME approved transportation.
Well, that's for non-emergency medical transportation. We're not saying you have to do that, I'm just saying that there are established rates.
Say that again, Kathy.
My point
First
is
part.
where there's rates established for non-emergency medical transportation, not that these folks would have to be enrolled that way. Just that we've gone through a rate setting process and trying to pull it up now. See what I'm saying?
So they could use either non-medical transportation vendor or not?
You would not, we're not making this is not part of that definition. So it would not have to be.
So they could use an Uber
But he was
driver.
just asking if there were rates established, if there are rates established for,
You could be an Uber driver.
If they had a contract with MCO,
you know,
They had the billing ability through the MCO. So it has to be yelled at.
I don't know, I'm trying to,
Do a special rate ACT tax price.
Non-emergency medical transport is a very specified service. Paratransit is a much broader definition that you may want
Right,
But
I
this
was
is.
I was just
gonna
trying
be
to
what
respond to
you
the
did.
question, have we established rates for like, if
Yeah,
this has to be some kind of a callback kind of, yes, we have, I mean, that was my only point.
Any other comments from this definition?
First one, you listened very well, and thank you.
Thank you. You got feedback.
So you got what we asked you.
Okay. Then again, if you think of something later, make sure to send it to us.
What is next, Omar?
I've already passed out supported living.
Okay.
Since we're on supported.
Good.
So I guess I do have a question for you, Lee. This one. So last time we did talk about changing the requirements for the service, the staff experience. And I did express concern, if you lower the requirements, are you still going to be able to defend a higher rate? Or do you think that higher rate for this service is justified, as traditionally been typical, or because of the changed, lowered requirements, is it going to result in a lower rate? I guess is my question. Follow what I'm saying? If you, okay, so this had more stringent staffing requirements and experience previously than other services. With this change, that has been eliminated and it's made similar to other services that we do as far as experience. Well, one of the reasons to justify a rate was you had to have more specialized staffing requirements. And if you take out that requirement, will it result in a reduced rate? To the rate set.
To answer that specifically, I think we would argue that it should not, because you need people that have qualified, the ability to be qualified to provide the service. The experience question really was related to the fact that we know that people having a difficult time finding those employees. And where else do you get experience other than doing it? It's one of those things that you have to do to get experience, and if nobody pays for it without experience, then you'll have nobody that can.
So when it comes down to the rate conversations, we'll be able to say, we expect having to pay staff more for this service, and therefore, we think it justifies having a higher rate than the other HAB services. Or not.
Remember with rates, all we're doing is all we're doing is trying to get some kind of a base for cost effectiveness purposes. So, I mean, as far as fluctuations in staffing and all the rest of it, that's, you know, an MCO business decision also. We're not setting rates per se, like mandating rates, I guess. is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you know, I understand Bob's point, it's guidance.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it is. Okay. You can raise your hand and ask.
But it's,
But I think that with any provider, I mean, you're going to pay for performance, or you would want to. I think as you mature as an MCO, you would want to pay for performance. I mean,
I think the other components of supported employment far outweigh the 3-year experience.
I think we haven't changed the meat and the reason for the definition. It's just that one piece that got kind of thrown in that wasn't in before when the rates were still up, you know,
Okay.
so I would hope. But good point.
Okay. So my computer looks different on this. It's smaller. It's hard to see. Can you guys see this one? Okay, so this is a supported living. Not much has changed from what we sent you guys before. You haven't received too much feedback on this one. So again, this is the service that can allow for 2 to 3 people to live in their own apartment or house, as long as they're on the lease. When you look further down in the definition, we broke it out into 3 levels. That information may go, may be used to establish the rates and not be as firm. But this is the basic definition that you guys have seen, and I believe we went over it briefly last week, or 2 weeks ago. And then this has the levels, and then it also has the special needs adjustment, and that's in case someone loses their roommate or children move, something like that. So it can add that added level of flexibility.
I have a question.
Okay.
It says on the first page, I guess the last paragraph, the supported living provider shall be responsible for providing an individualized level of supports, blah, blah, blah. The third sentence after the parentheses ISP, and have 24-hour per day availability. So does that make them standby staff and subject to being paid according to Department of Labor rules?
It's good.
Department of Labor rules on companionship living would apply, but currently that rule is being held in abeyance because the judge has overturned it. So you would have to address that when that came about. But it is availability, so the provider would have to have an on-call response available. And in cases where the individual was residing in the home as a companion, then we would have to look at whether or not it met companionship rule.
So if the Department of Labor implements the rule, if the judge, so the LME MCOs are going to be on the hook for that 24-hour, that standby pay.
The on-call status would have to be an on-call. It's not a person that's necessarily there. Maybe somebody who's called in for a shift. So it's not necessarily a situation where someone is being paid to wait. So it would have to be, we would have to be in compliance with the rule as it is established. Does that work?
As I understand the rule, waives the overtime. See, it's an exemption from having to pay overtime.
Yes, it does.
And so right now, that would continue in effect. The companion exemption would remain in effect as of now, unless the court overrules that, in which time they would be required to pay overtime.
Well, but once you're under FLSA, then that standby staff pay is due.
I think this is
The DOL meeting I went to with Smoky Mountain Center and its providers, before the court jumped in and stopped the DOL rule from happening, was absolutely terrifying. If I was an LME MCO, I'd have gotten out of the business right there and then. It just, and the same for the CAP DA folks and all of those nursing providers. I mean, I jump out faster than you could say boo.
We will do it's a great catch. We will, I think we'll cover it, but we will do another round with our lawyers to make sure. Okay.
Do you have a question, Ben?
I do. I have a son who probably would not be in a position to be under this particular service definition, but I do have some serious concerns with it, and that is you have individuals that have, and you're allowing for a care provider for at least one person living within that home. I'm going to be real frank. This particular service may work fairly well for mental health, stable mental health clients. IDD, on the other hand, 90% of them require supervision, on-site supervision. 90%. And it's interesting because, and like I said, it's unlikely my son would be in this particular service thing, but I'm speaking for the IDD-DD community. And you have excluded family members for providing services. I'd like to just give you an example of what I could see happening here. Let's say a brother goes ahead and becomes a roommate of his IDD brother. You're saying that he could provide services if he's trained, works for an agency, has gone through all the training. He can provide it for the roommate, but he can't for his own brother. Am I right in understanding this? Because who can see the problem? Who can see the problem with this? If somebody, I'm going to make it real plain, and I'm going to try and hold back the frustration that I have, because I have a lot of it. Family members are not required or responsible for the care and welfare of someone that is over 18. Even the guardian is responsible to make sure that they receive the care that they need, but they're not responsible to provide it, financially or otherwise. This is an adult that requires care. If any family member, an aunt, an uncle, grandfather, cousins, sibling, is trained in that particular role as a caregiver, it should not matter whether they are related to them or not. And in fact, the proof is in the pudding. They provide better care on a consistent basis, show up day in, day out, 24/7, sick, not sick. They're the ones that show up. They're the ones that come to the party and step in crisis. And for you to say the cousin or the brother can provide services for the roommate and not their sibling or cousin, there's something wrong with this picture. Because basically what it's telling me is you're saying, well, they can be paid to care for that person, and yes, if their brother or whoever needs their assistance, you think they're just going to step back and not even deal with it? So you want them to basically take care of two people and get paid for the one. That's what it's telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just another service definition that is trying to exclude family members as caregivers. Now I want to be real clear here. Right now I'm facing a crisis for my son where his community networking person has quit. I'm dealing with 2 respite workers and a temporary community networking person to cover 16 hours. Only about 9 hours a week is getting covered over the last 4.5 weeks. It's probably going to take another 6 weeks to put a community networking permanent person in place. If you don't think that it's taking up every minute of my time to deal with this, let them understand what's going on with my son, let them know his medical problems, his dietary needs, what his routine is. I take 20 hours a week of my time just dealing with his medical issues. I'm not paid support. His father is, but I'm not. But I can tell you it's a full-time job just dealing with the case management aspect of it. And my son has had 13 workers in 14 years, and he had 3 long-term workers covering about 6.5 of those. So the average turnaround on a worker is 8 to 10 months. And yet you want to exclude family members. They're the only ones that show up. Because the other people are in low-paying jobs, and they're in school, and they're not getting paid vacation time or sick time, and as soon as something better comes along, they're gone. So you need to get off the family members as care providers bandwagon, because what it's going to create and I jokingly said this 4 years ago, and I'm going to say it again, it's going to create a family care co-op. Meaning, I know this individual right here in my community, 5 miles from me, she can take care of my son and I'll take care of her son or daughter. Because you know what? She will be 100% vested in his care and totally understand what's going on with him and stick it out through thick and thin because she knows the care of her son or daughter is dependent on it with me. And I'll do the same. Now, if you want to go down that route, it'll happen. You know, you've got to stop this nonsense.
Any other comments for this definition?
One real quick one. I know Kenneth and Dave, you just love it. Top of the second page, requirements for the person's safety in the absence of a staff person must be addressed and may include use of telecare options. We had a little bit of a discussion of this regarding Katie and at OAH and the idea that you can have all the monitoring equipment in the world that you want, but what Katie needs is assistance, not just monitoring. I mean, it's great if the monitor says the house is on fire. Bummer for Katie, nobody's there to help her, but the house is on fire and we tracked that. So I'm a little concerned about this idea, use of telecare options. Have you talked to I don't know, the sheriff's departments or the police departments or, I mean, you know?
It doesn't require it, right? It says that you should consider it.
Okay, I'm just,
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but clearly health and safety have to come first.
all right.
But it doesn't require it, but it does allow us to consider it, so it opens up the door for questions about something.
For some people, that would be appropriate, because there are plenty of people that maybe they had a question and they could FaceTime somebody. I had a parent talk about that, how that helped them. He could show them what he was looking at. They could see it if there wasn't somebody right there. In that case, they could use that tele-assistance, you know, some technology.
Well, but that wasn't a safety issue, was it?
Yeah, it was, because something was on, somebody had, I guess at the house, had put something outside the door, like a flaming bag of something, and so he didn't know what it was or what to do with it. He showed it to the family told him what to do, and it was taken care of, but it could have been a major issue for that person. So that was something where the phone worked. You know, he's living in his own apartment, and that was the way that they could handle it, so.
Yeah, I would just say I think there's a ton of assistive technology available. It's not appropriate for everybody. It's really based on that individual needs. But it can be something as simple as what you're describing. It can be something way more complicated. It could be monitors, visual monitors, but it really is based on that person's needs. So I don't know if maybe this I think is an assumption.
Well, but that's where the problem with the 12-hour limit comes in. If we're going to stick to that idea that all of these services have a 12-hour limit on them, then someone who can't just be monitored and fend for themselves after 12 hours, clearly, and that's the majority of the people on the waiver, then clearly that 12-hour limit is...
Looking at the statement, the way it's written, there's two aspects to this. One is requirements for the person's safety in the absence of a staff person must be addressed. You could address that, and I don't know if it's appropriate to change must to shall. And either way, you are affirming that the person's safety is foremost and primary. The second aspect of that statement then says, and amongst the ways you can address this is the use of telecare. It doesn't automatically assume that that's the only way. It says this is a possibility. Use it, don't use it, but the requirement is still there to address the safety of the individual. And again, I don't know if shall is more appropriate than must. It's a stronger legal statement. Locks you in a whole lot tighter. Must is a little more wiggly than shall. But either way, I think the intent was the same. Is that we address the needs of the individual, and we're going to give you the option of using telemedicine as one possible way to do it, as long as it meets that first criteria, that first requirement. I don't know. Personally, if I'm writing documents like this, I prefer not to use shall and must because it ties you down a lot tighter. On the other end, shall and must become much more important item.
True.
Fair enough.
Anything else on this one? What's next, Master Kenneth?
Let's do community living exports. That one kind of ties in. Okay, so there was, so we had discussions about this one, and there was the exceptional quadrant that we took back, and then after internal decisions, we put that part back in. The first paragraphs we went over before. Under the secondary paragraphs, there was some information, different types of lists and examples that you guys wanted taken out that we did before, so those have been left out. We still left in the part about the technical assistance, if that's needed, if the team believes that they need technical assistance. So then it goes into, and we tried to break out this more exceptional part. So exceptional situations, they mean exceptional short-term situations that require hours of service beyond the limits of essential services. We changed some information that is for physician, intensive medical, behavioral, and support needs. So for people who do have high support needs, we just changed some things. What would be needed? You would need evaluations or assessments on how you would expect this to resolve in the future. That EPSDT and state-led services could be utilized if they're available. Then we kind of go into the request for hours. All of these would, of course, require approvals by the PHP. Request for up to 12 hours. The authorization period may be for 365. For 16 hours, it may be 180 days or half a year. Request for 16 or more hours daily, that would be that 90-day period that we would review at a higher clip. And then the rest of the definition remain the same. So I'm just going to go back up a little bit. Any questions on this so far?
What does short-term mean?
Non-permanent?
You can have long-term, non-permanent.
Right, that's true. So short-term, I guess we were thinking is when we were looking at the UR policy that we went to, we talked about short-term being 6 months or less. So I imagine that would be the same kind of paradigm. And that would follow along too with requests for 16 hours daily would be authorized for 180. So then if it's a continuing issue, then it would continue on that path. That makes sense.
You can say problems if you are more specific. That's very important.
Hey, question on the first paragraph, second sentence. I thought this before, not ever asked it, but I think I will ask it. It says a direct support professional. That's a generic term meaning a person who works professionally, hands-on with having services for the person. It's not a I guess it could be a licensed, certified direct support professional, certified by the National Association, blah, 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 possibly. But anyway, it doesn't mean that. This is just a generic term that means a person who works
One-on-one worker.
one-on-one work person, direct service staff. Correct? Okay.
So maybe it should be lowercase instead of uppercase?
Just
Maybe
a
it look like a
professional
title.
role?
I mean, is it a defined term?
You really got it.
It is. It's a defined term.
Lowercase
Then
would
it should
probably
be
be better
uppercase.
if it's, you mean just a generic.
If it's generic, lowercase, but if it's a defined term, then that's what you're referring to, it should be capitalized.
But we're not referring to someone who's
Certified.
Certified. So it seemed to be lowercase would be more.
Change the word. Gotta use a different term.
Direct care staff is the one-on-one individual that has been qualified, not certified, but qualified to work for that person through an agency.
Yeah, let's go back and look at the wording to try to make sure that we don't inadvertently imply that this is a certified position. Okay, Bob, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Now, this service is for both children and adults or adults only?
children and adults.
And these, I do, again, we don't know what the actual appendix limit on sets of services is going to say. We haven't gone over that, so we don't know what it's going to say. So it's difficult to go through this particular, well, any of these service definitions without understanding that. And I, under exceptional situations, if your budget allows you, because it's going to be based on your SIS score, so that's going to identify your support needs. So if your budget based on your SIS score is going to allow you to purchase 16 hours a day of community living and supports, why would you be required to fall under your exceptional situation? If you want to, if your budget qualifies you, maybe you want to purchase 8 hours a day of community living and supports and 8 hours a day of supported employment. I mean, whatever your budget allows you is what you should be able to purchase.
I think there are exceptions in which we're looking at, and this is one of them. We believe in that case is that if somebody's going to provide 18 hours, then it probably requires that there's a higher level of scrutiny of that, and that's the point.
Well, but
there are still things that we, despite the individual budget, Mary, there are still things that as we're transitioning to that, we do feel that requires that kind of scrutiny, and that's the rationale behind it.
so if someone doesn't have a 12-hour-a-day volunteer and that someone requires 24-hour supports, are you saying that they can't use their budget to purchase whatever they need to purchase because they don't have a volunteer? So, oh, whoops, you don't have a volunteer, so you are excluded from remaining in your own home. You must go to our AFL or our group home or decline waiver services, and here's our institution. I mean, so much of this is predicated on the idea that there is a 12-hour-a-day volunteer providing support.
Or we may just have to disagree at this point. And you'll have ample opportunity to comment when it's posted. And I would encourage you.
So for the 40 people that were getting home supports level 5, if all 40 of them write and complain, you'll change it? Or do the other 11,960 override us?
No. We will take into every comment that comes in, we will take those comments and weigh them all equally in terms of the value. Doesn't mean we'll change based upon any one comment.
We're a puny minority. We can't, I mean, this just is an attack and an attempt to move people into institutions. And it has been since we transitioned to this waiver.
It's not yet, but I appreciate your position.
Well, how many OAH hearings have you had? How many families filed? I mean, you know the 12-hour limit is inappropriate. You know it's just a made-up number. That's not evidence-based.
where we will disagree at this point, but again, the comments are absolutely the appropriate place to do this. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to find out why we don't have any agency or provider qualifications on this. There's really a conundrum going on here because it talks about natural supports and it talks about the direct paid caregiver, the direct support provider. And it's not actually saying that we're going to exclude family from this, but it's not saying that you will include them either. So where's the qualifications for staff and whether or not families will
So
be?
early in this process, we kind of went through the qualifications of staff that are very standard. This was a template that, for whatever reason, in the beginning, when we were building this, we built it off the waiver template, so we didn't check all of this.
No.
I think I emailed you about this. I didn't just delete all this information.
No, I know that.
So you would be able to have this provider managed or consumer directed, and the family member could provide this service. This was just information that wasn't filled in. So everything above is what's the important part of the definition.
Right,
We just didn't fill that in a Word template.
Well, the big problem with it is the fact that it talks about natural supports and it talks about the direct paid caregiver. And how the direct paid caregiver can provide training and whatnot to non-paid supports. Well, let me tell you, it's the non-paid supports guardian that's doing 40 or 50 hours a week anyway that is training them, not the other way around. Unless it is a family member that's very well, familiar with that client. So why is it? I see that it's structured both ways, but there needs to be some definitive verbiage in here that says a family member that has been a paid, direct support can continue to be paid direct support. And then I want to know, are you going to cap it at 40 hours? Are you going to allow for an exception above 40 hours? Because if I had to have, and this is where my son's services do lie, if I had to have someone to cover the 60 hours that his father covers, I would need 3 or 4 support people per across the board. That doesn't include day supports. I would have to deal with scheduling. I would have to deal with training. I would have to make sure that they are familiar with this, that, the other. I'd have to deal with filling in when somebody, calls and can't make it. You think that there's backup staff? There's not. There's not that knows the client and is not going to create total chaos when they lose somebody. And who's going to cover the 4 or 5, 6, 8 hours that person is going to do? It's going to be family or non-paid support. So you're telling me, well, that person can train the non-paid support. You guys got it totally backwards. It's the non-paid support, such as me, that's training them. And I'm really frustrated by the way this is worded. The bottom line is, it should be worded as, it shouldn't even have non-paid support issues in there. It needs to be worded as direct care provider, family or otherwise. This is the service, and these are the people allowed to provide the service, and these are the qualifications. And again, should not matter if it's a family member. If they've gone through the same training and they are competent and capable of doing the service, let them do the service. Because the average is a 68% turnover across this country for direct support caregivers. 68%. If I have 3 people caring,
I think we've heard,
I'm sorry. If I have 3 caregivers assigned to this service for my son throughout the week, we're talking just the 60 hours here. On a 68% turnover rate, I'm going to lose 2 of them a year. So I'm going to just have to keep retraining people over and over again. So let's be real clear that families can provide it, and let's get the qualifications on this service.
So I think we want to. I'm going to tell you what our plan is in terms of the hours. We're going to have in a proposal that 40 hours is a recommended employment that families and caregivers will provide, and then one individual. So we'll allow for up to 56 in exceptional circumstances. That's the number where we're going to go to in our proposal here. Now, in terms of the qualifications.
Why? Why
What should be
56?
based on what their needs are and their plan dictates.
I think what I'm going to say to you is that we believe that in the case of a family member, an individual providing more than 56 hours gets above a level in which it makes sense for one person to provide services in a week.
My son requires 116 hours a week of service.
I understand how you describe that, and I don't believe that you can provide 116 hours a week.
I've provided proof, and I've been given the 60
What I would say
hours.
to you is I don't think that what I'm going to say is that from the state of North Carolina's position, where we're at today, what we want to post is this requirement. And again, if you oppose it and you want to say something else, please submit your comments when it's posted.
Okay, let me just say this.
Why the 56 hours?
Okay,
Please, Barb.
Okay,
Why the
let me finish
56
my
hours?
comment. Let me finish my comment. I don't have a problem with the 56, so long as you allow for the darn service. And just like with CAP, it went on for 20 some odd years successfully. Give us a service, set the determination as to what is what, and let us get on with caring for these individuals. I don't want to see a fade out on that. I don't want to see a fade out. If it's 56 hours, give me the 56 hours and we'll make it happen. We'll make do. Don't be telling me that next year it could be cut by another 10 or 15 hours. Don't want to see it. I will make do. Just give me a number of hours and let me get a structured schedule in place. Let me get, every time I get a cut, and I got a 10-hour cut in day supports last year without any warning because it was supposedly a fade out thing. Well, guess what? You're not fading it out. You don't even have criteria for fading of services. You just get cut, and then somebody has to take that up. My point is, give me a figure and let me work within that figure.
I think we are. Very good.
Where did the 56 hours come from? Why that number?
The average, an average.
Oh, we guess 8 hours a day times 7 days a week, if I'm just pulling numbers.
Probably.
I'm guessing that's what I would guess.
And
So are your AFL providers limited to 56 hours?
Mary, we will disagree on this. Okay.
So if I take in Barb's son and she
Exactly.
takes in Katie, you're
can get 4 hours.
good with that, but we can't do it for our own because I'm a way better worker if I'm working for her son. I know you want to cut us off. I'm just trying to get you to say the 56 hours is just arbitrary, just as 40 hours was arbitrary.
It's based on the 8-hour day.
Dalia admitted the 40 hours was arbitrary. He and I had a conversation when he was on the cell phone driving.
Mary, we're going to disagree at this point.
Okay, so we disagree, but you're not going to admit it's arbitrary.
Please
All right.
submit your comments when we post. Okay.
Well, maybe I can get some legislation passed.
We need some answers before January of next year because I'm already working with the MCO trying to figure out what is going to happen to prepare the whole. My son, as the client, I'm trying to figure out what is going to happen with his services.
You clearly understand, and you will have answers before that. Thank you.
I hope really soon.
Okay.
Again, page 2, the last sentence, same capitalization.
True.
Issue for consideration. Where is it? That very last sentence of page 2.
Okay.
And you should probably limit that to the working hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are they referring to?
Bottom of the second page.
Working out, I guess.
Otherwise, I'm going to make the
Any
person
other
come and do
comments
the
on this
maintenance.
definition so far? Ready to move on to the next? Okay.
the next?
Let's do day support.
Why did children get the same hours as adults?
They shouldn't.
But they will, and they do now. CMSs are better, the legislature and CMS.
Okay, so day supports, when we first went over this, you guys were fairly happy with it. We added this component here for school-age children or younger. This is that developmental day component. Provides individual program for children in a licensed child care center. Talks about that. We also have this last sentence for individuals who are eligible for educational services under IDA. Day supports would be the payer of last resort for developmental day. That might change a little bit, just wording wise if it's not clear enough. We had the other part that for individuals coming out of school, we wanted them to be, originally we wanted them to be exposed to other options. And it was for someone 18 or older. We received feedback from you guys that it makes sense because people in the school age system start this at 16, started at 16, and then receive education on other meaningful day options, so that they don't immediately just filter into day supports. So those are some big changes as we keep going down. To the second page, we talked about for individual, for exceptional circumstances, medical, behavioral. We included those physical support needs because we felt like that wasn't encompassed in that from your guys' feedback. Thank you.
Yes.
And then another issue is the transportation, which we heard you, and then does it have to start or end with the day supports program? And this also is a little bit of a rough sentence, so it might be a little bit different, but it's expected that individuals physically touch the day supports facility once per week unless the requirement is waived by the managed care organization. So you wouldn't necessarily have to go every day to start or end. You just have to be there one time per week. Touch it.
You're going to take, oh, I'm sorry.
So you want the physical to be
Sorry.
outside at the program facility?
Once per week, unless it's waived. So sometimes if someone goes to an adult basic skills class, someone like that at a community college, that was already waived before, so that could be waived by the university.
And now with the transportation piece, I know we talked about, this would help for somebody who's living, from having to come back to the day program and go all the way out. But looking at, was there any more discussion about with the residential piece and who takes the, if somebody's bringing other people in, the residential component, and for people in rural areas, could there be some notification or modifier about excessive amounts of transportation that's expected? Because I haven't seen that much, because that is a real issue for rural providers. I know.
Okay, so
We had talked about that. We talked about not having to come into the day program would alleviate some of that. For those who live in very rural areas, the MCO is probably going to have to work with you on whether or not it's actually 75 cents a unit that goes towards the transportation. And then with the residential providers, if we can't require the residential provider to do it, if we're including the rate, or including the definition for everyone else. But if a residential provider preferred to do it, I don't know if we can stop them.
I misunderstood.
The intent is to accommodate somebody who, for whatever reason, cannot make it into a day program once a week, correct?
every day.
I think the intent was to accommodate that we've heard from several people that sometimes people are working outside and they're doing work out, and if they live across the county, why would you have them drive into the day program every day and do that? It just, the idea to make it more flexible.
So, and really for the people that live in the more rural areas that maybe say transportation is 30 miles one way, then you can work on it. What I'm hearing is a rate exception with the MCO for that individual. And if they're willing to do that with you.
You said the Of the rate, 75 cents is what's allocated toward transportation,
Per unit.
which is 15 minutes, right? Again,
$21 on average day.
That still doesn't work out to the math to equal the state rate for the mileage, so.
Is there any ability for an individual who's requested a waiver by the MCO to allow for less than once a week attendance? Is there any appeal or ability for them to say, wait a second, these are the circumstances? Just trying to anticipate circumstances that an individual in a rural community might say, you know, that's an hour and a half drive for me to get into that particular facility, or a 30-minute drive, whatever it is, and it becomes an undue burden on the individual. Is there ability for them to appeal outside of this particular request?
Well, I guess I have a similar question. It says unless waived, so if that example would be something the MCO would waive,
What are the conditions for a waiver?
or the conditions for a waiver.
But
The
really,
waiver of the waiver.
if they're only coming into the facility once a week, as we talked about, there's other definitions that would probably more appropriately serve this individual.
Individual day support,
Yeah.
because they don't have to be at the center for individual day support. They can be served in the community.
Right, well, and even too with group, but what I'm saying is, there's community networking, there's supported employment, there's other definitions that if my whole day is spent in the community and not at a facility, which is great, it just seems like it would be a different definition than it would be totally.
There is an alternative then.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess, was the question, to make sure that, so, I mean, again, we're looking to accommodate the individual and provide the best potential for success for them. If that's the case, and a waiver is not necessarily a solution here,
Right.
a different
Yeah.
definition, a different service would be the solution.
Well, and we really want to stay away from the word waiver, whatever we do, exception or something, but that's very different.
Right, especially if in the waiver.
I think what we're trying to do,
She
again,
dropped something.
maybe not successful, maybe not particularly well, is to not pigeonhole people into having to change the service definition if there's more flexibility needed. This, at the same time, recognize there are other services that you might use if somebody's not going to be there every day. But again,
Something like authorized or allow, something that gives it
we'll find a good work for it.
my thinking is create the most flexible environment possible without creating an environment that's so flexible that things fall apart.
And this is much more flexible than before you have to start and end.
I mean, you could just say something around the plan, as written in the plan, based on that person, so.
Physically touching once a week is, I don't see that surviving. It's a little bit silly. The purpose is ensuring that the supports provider exercises a certain degree of oversight or awareness of what is going on off-site. And if that's really the purpose, then that should probably be the focus rather than a physical, alleviate a touch once a week.
I see what you're saying.
Get to the purpose of the requirement.
Probably not call it physical touch, I may get it wrong or two.
Right, that's what I was
Maybe.
And I couldn't think of anything on Friday that would.
I see what you're trying to do. I see what you're trying to do, but
It sounds a little bit like a game of there's base, right?
Right,
Really.
but I mean, if you only have to go one time per week, it kind of just.
But it cause head scratching. What is the use of that?
It's,
Your
if I can
purpose is to
clarify,
maintain
it's,
some
and-
oversight. Somehow
I can kind of give you a first-hand approach of this. Someone that requires day supports in a center would be reporting to that center, whether it's 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. It's based on what's in their plan. If they don't require to be in that center, it would fall under a different service definition, community networking, the individual day supports. So therefore, you know, the once per week thing, yeah, it's important but it's really based on what they're capable of participating in. It's not based on what you dictate them being there for. If they can only be there 3 hours twice a week, then that's what their plan dictates. So the once a week kind of thing it's kind of redundant, because if they're in day supports, they're in day supports. And if they're in community supports, they're in community supports. Does that make sense?
That's a good point.
It does, I think, so in our inartful way of trying to make the waiver more flexible, there will be some things that just appear weird.
Yeah.
This may be one of them.
Yeah.
Because I think we're all trying to get to the same place, and the goal of this was, we heard from providers, and I think legitimately, and also from family members, saying, why is it, if the example, Joe comes into the day program in the morning and he's there, and in the afternoon he winds up going to an enclave site or something that looks like that, 20 miles away, which is across the street from his house. Doesn't it seem stupid to have to drive all the way back to the day program and then get
To sign out, just to
and
sign out.
that's really the intent.
I think it's, you've worded it that way, just for a sign-in, sign-out kind of thing, and that's really not what the specified service is about.
That's how our guys' comments that I had was very similar to what Dave said. It's the corporate service definition, if they needed that flexibility, it just made no sense having to do that, so.
I got you.
I think Rose's idea was a good idea, and I believe in the power of a plan a lot, that we can put many things that are exceptions in plans that make it individualized for that person, and that should be good and best practice to individualize plans where they make sense for people.
So we'll try to incorporate that. Any other comments for day supports?
Let's change the word touch to attend. Visit.
I like it.
Email.
I like touch. Maybe you just have to leave your shoes there.
Business.
All right. So let's go on to community guide.
It is sort of a nice test to see if they're actually reading the document. That's why the shoes thing I thought would be good.
You don't want to forget it there.
Yeah, I'll take it away. I tend to put things in my pocket, don't I? Do you want me to put it in my pocket?
Yeah.
All right.
Navigator.
So, suggestions that we need to maybe change the name.
Oh, no.
I'm not getting a big close-up of your face. I'm being real careful. I know.
So some of the main changes, we talked about that mandatory orientation.
Beautiful, but
We changed that to an annual informative informational session, but then we included that individual or their legally responsible person may choose to opt out of this requirement, but for the most part, it will be, the base will be, you're going to get it unless you opt out. So if we keep going down, we change that to informational instead of the orientation. Based on what you guys talked about last time, we put in some different language so it can support the person in developing person-centered plans. So we added that information. Assistance with guardianship, restoration of rights, we put SSI issues, developmental disability, vision of social security, financial and legal planning. Supports and educates the individual in preparing to participate in staff interviews, and assistance in developing life-related emergency plans, so things that you may want. So those are the main changes that we made based on our conversation a few weeks ago. And then we left the community connections, the self-direction, all that information the same.
Did we clarify about who could provide the service? Because I know there was a question about whether providers could provide the service, and we talked about it last time. And I know that most of the providers, I know in our community, are providers of services for community guide in the past. So how is that being handled under this definition? Where's that at?
I don't think we made any specific changes with that yet. But I think right now it would still be excluded.
I think we talked about, as we thought about the broader picture with B3 services, actually making that change in the B3 side, not in the greater side.
I'm sorry, could you say that?
Because community guide is also a B3 service.
Right.
So we talked about changing the community guide potentially in B3 for those people that receive the state services, state-funded services, so that state-funded service provider could be the, also provide community guide services.
Right.
For innovation.
No.
No, for somebody who's not on innovations, because there's a, I think there's a desire, we have a desire to see B3 used more for people on the waiting list and those folks that might only be receiving state-funded services.
I see. But it's not going to exclude the innovation self-directed.
And right here, if I'm understanding correctly, the agency with choice services is when someone does self-direction, right?
Correct.
So, so it's for those individuals, but in general, I think the intention is that providers will not provide to the people they support the service. But if you don't provide it to those individuals, you can provide it to other people, just no one you serve.
Right, yeah.
This, and even the way it's currently written, community guide, it doesn't really indicate the amount of time this community guide is supposed to devote to the individual.
I got 4 hours of training for direct services because I do have one service that's self-directed for my son. In order to allow him access to the $2,000 discretionary funds to pay for things that are not covered by Medicaid, I had to go through self-directed. So he has one service that's self-directed, and I only had to sit through a 4 hour, I don't even know if it was 4 hours, to tell you the truth, little training thing. Didn't really do much for me other than the fact that I had to do it. I mean, I already knew, everything that was there. So, I mean...
Well, because Katie has a community guide this year in her plan that is supposed to be trying to help her find unpaid natural supports.
Well, that's what mine was.
And I don't really see where, because isn't it a flat rate that's paid to the community guide?
It's a monthly rate.
Okay, but it's a flat rate, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so if they spend 10 minutes, they get the full rate versus if they spend...
I think it was 2 hours originally that people spent, so there's an expectation it's at least 2 hours a month, and people higher than that for the same rate.
There's also a
But this doesn't say any of that.
Go ahead.
That's all.
There's also a periodic rate for the agency with choice or EOR training assistance.
Well, that's probably a good point of view, as far as.
Because I'm kind of running her ragged.
Expectation.
Because she works for the ARC.
Center around it for that definition, honestly, is 2 hours for some individuals enough, and then for others, are people doing that with that flat rate? I don't know. I think that's part of why it's not as used as much. So if it was something more that was, is that something that could be turned into an hourly rate?
Anything.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah, Dave's having a stroke.
We're trying to get away from it. Yeah, but I think we see your point in terms of, is there a minimum?
Yeah, because this just doesn't say expectation. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, Ken.
Yes.
On, under self-determination on page 2, number 8 and 9, this is just a clarity question. So there's not duplication between that and care coordination. So 8 and 9 do not duplicate what's under care coordination under exclusions on page 3, number 1. You understand my question? Are 8 and 9,
No, so the purpose is that in these, in these cases, they're developing the plan and then the care coordinator, they're developing the treatment plan.
The care coordinator does a treatment plan. This is the person-centered plan that helps inform the treatment plan.
so
In preparation of.
lots of confusion on this.
Don't add to it.
Well, maybe saying what they've said, but, so anyway, everybody's clear that 8 and 9, not the same thing as inclusion number 1, not care coordination. Everybody's good with it.
And we can say that, flat out say that, it's not the same as care coordinator.
Again, I could clarify that. My son has the
Excuse me just a second. Say again, Kathy.
I said we could just say there that this does not include, or this is not to be duplicate. Yeah. That's duplication of care coordination treatment plan and use.
What you would have to be careful about with the MCOs and the feedback I got with the timing of everything, make sure that you get that plan done. Providers, you know what I mean? I mean, just on the implementation side.
Take one step back. I think the discussion was, and I think where we try to go with this is that the care coordinators have responsibility under the waiver to write an individual service plan, CISP, which in the CMS vernacular is what they'll see as the reason why we say assist with, because what I think we all know is that for individuals, many individuals developing a life plan, person, whatever you want to call it, to inform what that individual service plan is what a lot of folks want. And that's what we're trying to get at, so that we don't want to exclude this and we want to write it. We might write some wording in there that says it obviously does not duplicate what the care coordinator does to writing the ISP for submission of the waiver. I think there are distinctions between what happens in agency and choice and the responsibilities there. What we're trying to make it clear is generic, that people have that opportunity to have someone else who isn't working for the LME-MCO to help address some of those plan issues. So one more step as you do this, as you begin to think about community guide, cascading down on the B3 side of this, is that for that group of folks in particular, if we'll make adjustments to B3, that's one of our goals, you begin to think about people who are not on the waiver and who have B3 services, who have maybe state services that allows for a greater opportunity for really thinking about person-centeredness with that provider. And then if you go to people who are Medicaid eligible or receiving no services from the state, this actually opens up the door for having community guide provide a greater sense of connectedness to the system and be a support for the LME-MCO and looking at how they're other folks that might be in a waiver list can enter the system. So in some sense, it's clearly a waiver service. We're trying to make sure that it meets the needs of people on waiver, but we also want to begin to look at this as a bigger picture to include those people.
One thing that may help, I see in exclusions number 1, second line, it uses the word assist. So you've got assisting in both areas. Who develops the ISP?
The care
Coordinator.
Well, the team, care coordinator is the responsible party.
But
here it says
so I'm talking about the word assist. Under number 1 it says
Which is
care
staffing.
coordination under managed care includes assisting. So you got, I guess they're assisting, but they're primary.
Oh, I see.
Responsible for
Yeah, care coordination under managed care includes the development of the ISP.
Again, can
the word
I,
assisting there is used in both spots.
can,
In 89 it also says assist. So
you've got someone
you got
sitting
everybody
there.
assisting who's developing.
We know who is developing because I've listed the waiver describing the care coordinator doing that. So, I mean, also there's a context here. These are discrete service definitions we're talking about. It's a much bigger waiver that's being submitted that describes what care coordination does also. So don't get hung up too much on just these definitions by themselves. Yes, ma'am.
If I can just explain that the assisting is on seeking out services and supports that that aren't in the waiver, aren't part of the waiver, aren't part of Medicaid coverage. They are looking for other ways of supporting that individual. They're more of an advocate. They're finding a way to meet the needs that aren't there. So it's not developing their plan. It's trying to find things that could possibly be written into that plan. But that assistance is more about advocacy. Let's figure out what we need to do to get this. That's what they're doing. It's not really developing the plan. They may make recommendations based on what the guardian wants or the client needs, but they're not the ones actually developing the ISP. Does that clarify that?
Yeah. Did we, I'm sure you did, I like the word navigator a lot. Is that okay with both integrated here?
We haven't gone through that.
That's actually where we got it from the IDP.
I don't think they have a trademark on it.
No, you get confused.
And it is a question, does it confuse things with it? I mean, we're gonna put it out there, we probably will get comment on it, and that's, just know that that's, well, you know, we didn't wanna hold it up, and we took what y'all said seriously about.
But descriptive.
Any other comments for community navigator?
Kenneth, you are getting a vacation as soon as this thing is posted.
No, Kenneth, you don't.
He needs vacation first.
Then you get all the emails, Kenneth.
He needs to analyze fire for a minute.
Okay.
All right, so closing community navigator.
Is this a good place for a 10-minute break?
It may be a great place for
Yeah, or you know what, I'm gonna hear the other side.
All right, 10 minutes. Means this block 2:36.